The US Navy is going big. Massive, in fact. Backed by a staggering $1.01 trillion defense budget, America is launching a historic naval buildup that includes 19 new warships, advanced submarines, and next-generation firepower. It's the largest push in decades to dominate the oceans, above and below the surface, and it's already sending shockwaves across the globe. This isn't just a fleet expansion, it's a message. The US is ready to rule the seas again. Let's take a closer look at these developments and how they're likely to change the chessboard in the US's favor. In March 2025, President Donald Trump outlined the challenges and how he was going to address them. We are also going to resurrect the American shipbuilding industry, including commercial shipbuilding and military shipbuilding, he stated, adding, "We used to make so many ships. We don't make them anymore very much, but we're going to make them very fast, very soon. It will have a huge impact to further enhance our national security. To many people, it's about time." Nearly 80 years after the end of World War II, the US Navy, while still the most powerful naval force in the world, is a shadow of its former self in terms of numbers. In 1946, the US boasted some 1,248 military ships. In 2025, it has just 297. Today's vessels are undoubtedly much more technologically advanced and pack outrageous firepower than that massive post-war fleet. However, the smaller fleet size means the US Navy no longer has sufficient vessels to respond to crises in various parts of the world simultaneously, let alone engage in conflict in multiple theaters. This state of affairs was highlighted in early 2025 when ongoing hostilities in the Middle East forced the US to deploy 2 of its 11 active aircraft carriers to the Red Sea, the USS Carl Vinson and the USS Harry Truman. This resulted in a limited US carrier presence in the high-priority Indo-Pacific region, as some carriers were in maintenance, returning from deployment or undergoing workup, though the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was still deployed to the area in March 2025. With China's growing maritime power in the region being identified by the US as its primary military concern, that situation is clearly far from ideal. That's not to say the US Navy is no longer the most fearsome presence on the waters. The US boasts 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, 10 of the Nimitz class and 1 of the new Ford class, which is intended to replace them over time. It also has 68 active nuclear-powered submarines, regarded as the most sophisticated and powerful in the world. These include Virginia-class, Los Angeles-class, Ohio-class, and Seawolf-class craft. In terms of warships above the waves, the US has 9 cruisers, primarily of the Ticonderoga class, and 76 destroyers, mostly of the Arleigh Burke class and Zumwalt classes. The fleet also contains 26 corvettes for littoral missions, primarily Freedom and Independence class vessels, and 8 mine warfare ships, mostly of the Avenger class. Plus, the US has 34 amphibious assault vessels, including the America class, Wasp class, San Antonio class, Whidbey Island class, Harper's Ferry class, and Blue Ridge class ships. Besides the squadrons of F-35 Lightning II and other 4th and 5th generation fighter aircraft stationed on its carriers, these vessels carry a ferocious bouquet of highly destructive weapons. These include BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles, once nuclear capable but now conventionally armed, RGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and RIM-162 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, ESM, to name just a few. Make no mistake, the US Navy still dominates the world's oceans. So why the increased urgency in resurrecting US naval power, as Trump put it? His decisive action in this regard, which we'll get to shortly, are a continuation of initiatives started during the administration of his predecessor, President Joe Biden. No world leader in their right mind underestimates the power of the US fleet, particularly the US's main rivals, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Nobody doubts the US's ability to keep producing cutting-edge, world-leading weapon systems. Rather, the concerns have been about the US's ability to maintain its naval dominance going forward in terms of numbers. Defense analysts have been sounding the alarm for years about the eroded state of the US shipbuilding industry, both commercial and military. While the likes of China, Japan, and South Korea's shipbuilding prowess go from strength to strength, Japan and South Korea are, of course, deep allies of the US, so the growth of their naval industries is much less of a concern and may actually offer a way for the US to rapidly increase its fleet. Russia, Iran, and North Korea are somewhat of a threat in their regions. However, while all three have been steadily upgrading and expanding their naval power, all lag far behind the US. They've also long since given up on competing with the US as a naval power and are predominantly focused on other areas of military production like missiles, electronic warfare, and now the ubiquitous drones. But China's burgeoning naval might is a growing problem. Before the turn of the century, China's navy had been a capable but limited force, primarily focused on coastal defense. In the current century, however, boosted by exploding financial growth as a result of becoming more or less the world's factory, the Chinese navy has in some respects already overtaken the US, and the rate at which its naval output is outpacing the US is growing alarmingly. In 2025, the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, had 1,010 ships in active service, although 466 of those are support ships of various kinds, 27 are cargo ships, and 51 are classified as other, i.e. not strictly military ships. That leaves 466 military vessels, meaning their total military fleet is over 1.5 times greater than the US's. That statistic would be significant if the majority of those vessels were single-engine speedboats with a couple of PLAN grunts armed with machine guns, grenades, and maybe a motor on board. Have a look at our video about what happened when Somali pirates tried taking on the US Navy with that kind of force. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for them. However, in terms of its composition, the Chinese fleet is also catching up to the US at an uncomfortable pace. The Chinese now have 2 modern aircraft carriers, the Liaoning, active since 2012, and the Shandong, active since 2019, with a third, the Fujian, fresh out of the dockyards and currently undergoing sea trials. They also have 73 active submarines, of which 15 are capable of firing nuclear weapons. Now, of that total, 34 are at least 20 years old. The Chinese have launched 13 in the last decade, including 2 Jin-class nuclear ballistic submarines and 2 Shang-class nuclear attack submarines. That means, in terms of submarine production, China has caught up to the US. The US has also averaged 1.3 new submarines per year over the past decade, all of them nuclear-powered, nuclear weapon-capable Virginia-class submarines, costing around $4.5 billion each. The long-awaited Columbia-class nuclear-powered submarine, capable of fielding both conventional and nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, has been in production since 2021, but is now only expected in 2031. These kinds of delays and costs are a large part of the reason why China is catching up so quickly, and not just in submarine production. The PLAN now also has a diverse fleet of 50 destroyers, 50 corvettes, 58 mine warfare ships, 46 frigates, and 94 patrol boats. The key thing is that while the fleet is being modernized and supplemented at an exponentially increasing rate, the US's naval production has been heading in the opposite direction for some time. As a result, in 2024, China already operated 234 warships, compared to the US Navy's 219. The US still has a significant advantage in guided missile cruisers and destroyers, as well as overall tonnage. However, according to a 2025 CSIS study, China is on track to reach a 425-ship fleet by 2030, compared with the 300 vessels the US Navy would possess at current rates of production. Why? It's simply a question of capacity. China's shipbuilding industry is booming, while the US's has been hollowed out. And that's maybe the most exciting and important aspect of Trump's plan, as we shall see. Let's not beat around the bush. The problem is addressable but acute. During the Second World War, the US pumped out 2,000 ships per year. That included 24 Essex-class aircraft carriers, at an average rate of 1 every 2 months for 4 years. Today, it takes a decade to commission a new Ford-class carrier after already laying down its keel, let alone complete it. Granted, those ships weren't nuclear-powered and were nowhere near as large, sophisticated, or powerful as the Ford-class carriers the US has today, but still that rate of output and that world-leading quality is a key reason why the US Navy and the maritime industry in general dominated the oceans unrivaled for decades. But things change. By the 1970s, the US economy had grown and shifted into new industries and technologies, in no small part due to the US's role as a policeman of the oceans. Trade and industry globalized, and new players entered old industries. US shipbuilding had begun to atrophy, but American shipyards were still building about 5% of the world's tonnage, up to 25 new ships per year, mostly commercial but some military. By the 1980s, however, the combined output had dropped to its current rate of around 5 ships per year, where it has remained to this day. That's a mere 0.13% of the world's global shipbuilding market. As a result of all this, the entire US-registered fleet of ocean-going commercial ships numbers fewer than 200 vessels, out of a global total of 44,000. By contrast, in 1951, the US merchant marine transported a third of all global trade. On the military side of things, as recently as 1995, the US had 8 active Navy shipyards and hundreds of active commercial shipyards. In 2025, the US will have only 4 active public naval shipyards for repairing, maintaining, and building ships for the Navy. And while there are 154 private shipyards across the country, only a fraction of them are actively building large commercial or military vessels. They are Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, Virginia, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard on Seaveys Island in Kittery, Maine, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and Intermediate Maintenance Facility on Puget Sound at Bremerton, Washington, and Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard and Intermediate Maintenance Facility at the historic location in Hawaii. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, in 2024, the US Navy reported that its new guided missile frigate was 3 years behind schedule. The aircraft carrier Enterprise was 2 years behind schedule. The Columbia-class submarines were 1 year behind schedule. And the Virginia-class attack submarine was 2 years behind schedule. The US Navy had been busier than usual during the year, with major deployments to the Middle East. The existing shipyards seemingly lacked the capacity to simultaneously fulfill their deliveries of new ships and handle the extra maintenance and repairs those additional deployments necessitate. By comparison, China has 307 active shipyards, of which 35 are reportedly building military or dual-use vessels. While China's total shipbuilding capacity per year is unclear, it's certainly orders of magnitude greater than the US's 4, however superior the US ships may be. In fact, 232 times greater to be exact, according to a leaked US Navy brief. What that means, according to the CSIS report, is that China State Shipbuilding Corporation, China's largest state-owned shipbuilder, built more commercial vessels by tonnage in 2024 than the entire US shipbuilding industry had since World War II. Those are eye-watering statistics by anyone's standards. But how did this regrettable state of affairs come to be? In truth, it's been a progressive and gradual decay over decades, with a decline in US commercial shipbuilding occurring before the decline in its military production. During the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, then-President Ronald Reagan's neoliberal economic policies opened the door for globalization, which rapidly took hold across the non-Soviet world. More and more US companies began to take advantage of lower barriers to entry to foreign markets and the lower labor costs and economies of scale they presented. With the production of the US markets increasingly being offshored to Southeast Asia and other developing nations, many industries in the US were disincentivized from undergoing industrial modernization domestically, including shipbuilding. So with rising labor costs adding to increased competition from abroad, shipyards began downscaling and shutting down. Reagan devoted substantial resources to the Navy during the 1980s, including building a host of new ships. However, after the Soviet Union disintegrated in the early 1990s, there simply wasn't the same need to keep up the same rate of production. Besides, the military shipbuilding industry had run into the same issues of rising costs as the commercial industry, and the Navy started decommissioning yards. In 1996 and 97, it turned over the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard to Philadelphia, Charleston Naval Shipyard to North Charleston, Long Beach Naval Shipyard to Long Beach, and Mare Island Naval Shipyard to Vallejo. Later in 2011, the New Orleans Naval Station, which had never been a formal naval shipyard but did build vessels during World War I, was decommissioned and turned over to the city under a redevelopment initiative known as Federal City. That left just 4 active public naval shipyards to handle all of the Navy's maintenance, repair, and shipbuilding needs. But lack of capacity isn't the only issue the US will have to solve if it wants to seize the initiative in what's fast becoming a naval arms race back from China. In a thorough 2024 internal review of its shipbuilding processes, the Navy found that 3 other issues contributed to the hiccups in being able to deliver its objectives. Firstly, in recent times, supply issues resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic led to delays across the board, which have been compounded and exacerbated by other factors. The global supply shock caused by pretty much the entire world's governments deciding to lock down their populations and stall their economies simultaneously for months on end affected all supply chains, not least the US Navy's. Secondly, the Navy is experiencing a very specific type of labor shortage. While the US has faced challenges in fulfilling recruitment quotas, that's not the exact issue here. The shortage is of trained shipyard workers, welders, electricians, pipe fitters, and ship fitters, not necessarily boots-on-the-ground personnel. According to the Navy, the reason boils down to pay. Commercial shipbuilders can often afford to pay more than the Navy. Additionally, other industries that require those same skills, factories, etc., pay even more than that. The third factor is design changes implemented after a project has already begun its construction phase. Military technology is advancing exponentially, with the war in Ukraine literally redefining how war is fought every few months. So these design changes are likely to be well-founded and necessary. Moreover, the rapid pace of military innovation, the need for mid-production design changes is likely to continue being an issue hereinafter, perhaps even more so when production ramps up. As the Chinese are no doubt discovering, implementing a design change on one ship in production is one thing, but coordinating it on multiple ships across multiple shipyards at the same time is another beast entirely. So with all that in mind, what's Trump intending to do about it? The most decisive steps he's taken yet are outlined in the proposed $1.01 trillion national defense budget request for fiscal year 2026. That's a record defense spend, a 13.4% increase from fiscal year 2025, which was also a record. Included in it is $292.2 billion for the Navy, along with $197.4 billion for the Army, $301.1 billion for the Air Force, and $170.9 billion defense-wide. The breakdown of the Navy's funding reflects its pivot in recent years toward becoming a more modern, flexible fleet with more amphibious capability. This shift is also evidenced by the US Marine Corps returning to its maritime roots with its advanced base doctrine after decades of being a kind of second army. The standout item is the commissioning of 19 new ships, with a focus on agility. For starters, there's another Columbia-class nuclear ballistic missile submarine and 2 Virginia-class attack submarines. That brings the US a bit closer to China's 73-strong submarine fleet, though 5 more would still be needed to reach full parity in raw numbers. There are also 2 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, which proved to be agile and effective during the US's missions in and around the Red Sea in 2024 and 25. However, the emphasis on agile amphibious operations is unambiguous, especially with the developments in the Marines we just outlined. Also on the list are 1 America-class amphibious assault ship, 1 San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock, and 9 medium landing ships. Rounding off the list are 2 John Lewis-class fleet oilers and a T. Argos ocean surveillance vessel. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the US might conceivably be gearing up for World War II-style sea-based invasions like D-Day, but much more high-tech with killer drone swarms and guided smart bombs exploding everywhere as the Marines disembark. Nonetheless, considering that in 2024 the US only included 6 new ships in its record budget, 19 is a serious step up, 3.75 times in fact. Of course, given the capacity constraints and delays with fulfilling existing orders we've already outlined, quite when these new ships might be delivered is anyone's guess. But the move signals serious intent, and momentum has to start somewhere. Some of the other provisions in the budget are also clearly intended to address the other issues hampering ramped-up production. The $2.5 million allocated for nuclear shipyard productivity enhancements seems a little small compared to some of the other line items in the budget. But since we don't know the details, perhaps that's all that's required to double or triple output at the existing yards. There's also $1.3 billion for industrial base supply chain improvements, which should go a long way to resolving the Navy's post-COVID supply chain issues, greatly improving productivity in the docks. But perhaps most importantly, there's $160 billion allocated for enhancing military readiness and training, as well as quality of life improvements for service members and their families. That includes a 3.8% pay rise and a $5 billion investment in unaccompanied housing for service members. Assuming these or similar benefits are made available to the shipbuilding labor force, the labor shortages that have hampered production should be much easier to fill. All things considered, these measures are a massive boost for the US Navy, and maybe the start to a US shipbuilding juggernaut rolling again. Another major step would be if the Save Our Shipyards Act is adopted. The proposed bipartisan bill, introduced in March 2025, would establish a national commission to investigate the condition of the US maritime industry and recommend steps to revitalize our maritime industrial base. Time will tell if it's all too little too late. However it all turns out, we'll be covering it, so make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep getting the inside story. Thanks for watching.